On the morning of September 15th, 2008, Daniel arrived at his Manhattan office earlier than usual. The sky outside was soft gray, heavy with something that felt like waiting. The building buzzed quietly, too quietly. For the first time in months, no one was talking about bonuses. No one was bragging about new deals. There were just whispers, headlines on phones, nervous glances. That was the day Lehman Brothers collapsed. Daniel wasn't a top executive. He wasn't the guy who made the big bets. But he was in the room, a mid-level analyst at a firm with deep exposure. He'd seen the signs for months, watched the numbers shift in ways that made him sit up straighter at night. And still, he stayed quiet. Like everyone else, the markets opened in a panic. Phones rang nonstop. Monitors blinked red. Within an hour, the firm had lost more than $200 million on just 3 positions. Daniel's hands shook as he typed. His boss screamed into a phone behind him. Someone across the floor vomited into a trash can. But Daniel? He survived. By noon, he was already adapting, selling off what little still had value, repositioning funds, calculating losses against what could still be leveraged. It was ugly, but it was business, and he was good at business. By Friday, the firm had trimmed 14% of its staff. Daniel wasn't one of them. By October, the market had bled over 30%. Daniel moved his savings. He even made a few well-timed trades. By the end of the year, while most of the country was drowning, Daniel had stabilized. Not rich, but intact. He had survived the crash. That night, he took the train home in silence. His suit still smelled like adrenaline and printer toner. The city outside was flickering between grief and denial. But inside his apartment, the one he shared with his wife and daughter, everything looked untouched. He kissed his wife without really seeing her, hugged his daughter without noticing the worry in her eyes. He sat down at the dinner table like a man returning from war, pretending the war hadn't followed him home. He didn't tell them what he saw that week, didn't explain how close they had come to losing everything. He didn't tell them about the friend from another firm who had tried and failed to jump ahead of the collapse and was now under investigation. He didn't say that their future had dangled by a thread sewn together by silence, lies, and unspoken risk. He just said, "It's been a rough week," and they nodded, believed him, or at least pretended to. But something changed that night. His wife saw it first, the way he looked past her when she spoke, the way he winced at small noises, how he flinched when the news showed footage of trading floors in chaos. His daughter asked if he was okay. He smiled, always smiled. But inside, Daniel had brought something home from the wreckage. Not physical, not even visible, just weight. A survivor's guilt. The crash hadn't taken his house, hadn't stolen his job, but it had done something worse. It had turned him into someone he didn't recognize. Someone who could watch the world fall and still go to work the next day. And that man, the one who survived, wasn't the same man his family knew. He told himself it would pass, that things would go back to normal. But deep down, Daniel knew the collapse hadn't ended when the markets closed. It had just moved indoors. The months that followed felt like watching life from behind glass. Daniel still went to work, still wore the same suits, still came home on time, but nothing felt solid. The world outside talked about recovery, about bailouts and reforms, yet none of those words made sense inside his living room. He couldn't sleep, not really. He lay awake for hours, watching the ceiling, heart ticking like a metronome. When he did sleep, the dreams were loud phones ringing, screens flashing red, voices yelling numbers that made no sense. His wife, Claire, tried to reach him. She asked him questions, how he was doing, what it had been like, what he'd seen. But every time she opened that door, he closed it. It was bad, but it's over, he would say. Then he'd change the subject, or pretend he was tired, or smile. The smile became a mask he wore constantly, to coworkers, to friends, even to his daughter, Lila. Especially to Lila. She was 7, and she noticed more than he realized. "Why don't you laugh anymore, Daddy?" she asked one night, holding her stuffed dog close. He told her he was just tired, but it wasn't exhaustion. It was something else. A quiet corrosion. He couldn't explain why he felt guilty for surviving, only that he did. Every day, the news ran stories of families losing their homes, retirees losing their savings, suicides triggered by vanished pensions, and he had survived. Not because he was better, just luckier, positioned right when the collapse came. And instead of feeling grateful, he felt complicit. Claire noticed the shift, the distance, the way Daniel flinched at phone calls, the way he avoided conversations about the economy, about anything real. She started taking Lila out more, visiting her sister, staying longer. Daniel didn't ask why. He knew. He had started disappearing long before they did. By spring, the cracks turned into fractures. Arguments started quiet at first, and louder, about nothing, about everything, about how he wasn't here, even when he was home, about how he didn't talk anymore, about how she didn't understand what it had felt like to hold the future in your hands and watch it dissolve. He tried once, just once, to explain. He told her about the day a colleague collapsed in the office bathroom, about the look in a senior manager's eyes when he realized the bonuses were fake, about the way people screamed when numbers fell, not because they lost money, but because they lost control. But Claire didn't cry. She just asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me this before?" And Daniel didn't have an answer. Maybe he didn't want to relive it. Maybe he thought he was protecting her. Or maybe he didn't want her to see what he had become. A man who watched the building burn and chose to keep walking. One night, Lila had a nightmare. Cried for him from her room. Daniel didn't wake up. Claire went to her, held her, whispered to her. She didn't ask Daniel about it the next day. She didn't need to. The distance between them was no longer emotional. It was structural, like the fault lines he used to study in risk models. At work, Daniel started spending more time at his desk, alone. No drinks after hours, no lunches with colleagues, just numbers and silence. He told himself it was temporary, but somewhere deep down, he felt it. The crash had ended. The market had recovered, but his life was still falling. The official story was that Daniel had survived 2008, but the unofficial truth, the one no one put in headlines or memoirs, was that the real collapse came after. It began subtly, like water leaking into drywall. Unseen at first, then unmistakable. Claire stopped asking questions, stopped waiting for answers. She filled her days with errands, projects, and trips to her sister's house that lasted just a little longer each time. Daniel pretended not to notice. He told himself that things were just adjusting, that families, like markets, had to bend to pressure. But what he didn't see, or didn't want to see, was that Claire wasn't bending. She was breaking. By fall of 2009, she had stopped sleeping in the same bed. Lila had started stuttering again, a habit she'd overcome 2 years earlier. Her school counselor called one afternoon to ask if everything was all right at home. Daniel said yes. Of course, everything was fine. It wasn't. The world outside had started to move on. News cycles turned to politics. Markets began to rise. Stimulus plans rolled out. Financial institutions rebranded. The men who caused the crisis were back on magazine covers, with cleaner suits and new slogans. Daniel watched it all from behind a pane of memory. The building where he had once sat through those critical hours now had a new name. The conference room where the meltdown began now hosted client brunches. But inside his home, the echoes of that week in 2008 were still loud, and they got louder. The final blow came on a Tuesday morning. Claire didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just handed him a letter and said, "I need to go where there's air." Inside the envelope, her decision. She and Lila would be staying with her sister for now. No mention of divorce. Not yet, just distance. Daniel stood in the kitchen holding that letter, hearing the front door click shut like a final trade. For the first few days, he tried to fill the silence. He went to work. He stayed late. He cleaned things that didn't need cleaning. But nothing filled the hollow shape they left behind. A week later, he called Claire. She didn't answer. He tried Lila's school, left a message with the front office. He checked her social media. Nothing. No posts. No updates. No photos. As if they, too, had vanished from the system. Daniel found himself walking in circles through the apartment, noticing small things he'd never paid attention to. The chipped paint on Lila's doorframe, Claire's coffee mug still in the sink, the faint scent of her shampoo on the towel that hadn't been washed yet. He tried to find comfort in logic, in numbers, in ratios and returns. But nothing added up. He had survived the crash, kept his job, kept the apartment, even grew his portfolio while others went under. But none of that could answer the one question he kept asking in the quiet. Why does it feel like I lost more than they did? The market didn't crash his marriage. The bank didn't take his daughter. But it had taken something unspoken, something essential. And now, every time he looked in the mirror, he saw it. Not grief, not guilt, just absence. Not the kind you feel, the kind you become. By 2012, the headlines had changed. The economy was booming. Markets were breaking records. Investment firms had rebounded, rebranded, and returned to the pedestal. People were smiling again. Champagne corks popped in boardrooms that had once echoed with panic. The world had moved on. Daniel hadn't. He still took the same train, still walked the same sidewalk to the same building. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. He wasn't part of it anymore. Not really. He showed up. He logged in. He hit deadlines. But there was no heartbeat behind the work. Just muscle memory. Claire had officially filed for divorce the year prior. It was amicable. Cold, but clean. No fights. No accusations. Just paperwork. The final numbers in an equation that had been dying quietly for years. He saw Lila on weekends. Sometimes. But even those visits became quieter, more distant. She was growing fast. Her eyes carried a wisdom beyond her age, the kind that develops when a child watches a parent vanish while still standing in the same room. Daniel tried to reach her, took her to museums, to movies, to parks. But something was always in the way, something invisible. A wall he had built during the crash and never taken down. One Sunday, she looked up at him and asked, "Dad, if everything is back to normal, why aren't you?" He didn't have an answer, because the truth was, nothing was normal. Not for him. He had walked through fire while everyone else saw smoke. And when the fire went out, all that remained was silence. He read books on recovery, therapy, meditation, resilience. None of them spoke the language he needed, the dialect of someone who survived a financial war, only to return to a home that no longer existed. He kept working. He stopped hoping. He told himself this was just life. But deep inside, a question haunted him. What did I actually survive? Not the crash, not the market. He had survived being part of something so broken, so cruelly efficient, that it rewarded silence and punished truth. He survived by becoming part of the system, and the system had no room for grief, no pause for introspection, no repair for what it quietly destroys. On the anniversary of the collapse, he walked past the old building. It was now a wellness startup. Open windows, sleek signage, plants in every corner, smiling people with laptops and oat milk lattes. He stood outside, watching through the glass. No one inside knew what had happened there. No one remembered. The building had moved on, but he hadn't, because some collapses don't make noise. Some don't happen in a moment. They stretch across years, silent, steady, and devastating. And some survivors don't walk away with scars. They walk away hollow. Years later, Daniel sat alone in a cafe, watching strangers pass by a billboard that read, "Stronger markets, brighter futures." He wondered if anyone ever paused to think about the people who were left behind in that so-called recovery. The ones who didn't lose their money, but lost their lives anyway, piece by piece. His phone buzzed with an email. An invite to a reunion for former employees of the firm. A chance to celebrate resilience. He stared at it, then deleted it. Because what do you celebrate when survival feels like a curse? He still had his job, still paid rent, still existed in the economy. But the things that made a life, laughter, connection, family, those had been quietly liquidated. Not by a single decision, but by a series of moments where he chose silence over truth, detachment over vulnerability. And now, the cost of surviving the crash was finally clear. He didn't lose everything at once. He lost it slowly, while everyone else was looking the other way. The system collapsed. He didn't. But somewhere along the way, the man he was didn't survive. Just the shell that walked out the other side.